All right, welcome back to another episode of Private Practice Practically. I'm here with a very special guest, Samantha Schalk. Samantha, how are you?
Hi, Rich. I'm doing great. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing awesome. I had a great breakfast, awesome coffee, came out solid, and I'm fired up. I'm really excited to learn more about you and what you do.
Well, I'm happy to talk about it.
Yeah. So for the audience that may not know you, can you tell us a little bit about your story and how you got into the work that you do?
Well, I have been a therapist for 24 years, so I've been in the field for a long time.
Dang.
And pretty much from the very beginning of getting into the field, I started doing things on a supervisory kind of role and administration. And in that was working even a good deal with like policy development and how to structure a practice and different types of compliance things. And in that kind of work, I ended up having a lot of colleagues who would reach out to me with questions, people who weren't on my staff, but worked for different agencies. And those people would come and ask me questions. And I started realizing that there was a pretty big gap in what people were being taught in school or even taught after school. Because, of course, your graduate school program can't necessarily cover everything for any kind of field work you might end up doing. So HIPAA and compliance was one of those things that wasn't really being taught or addressed a lot, either in a supervisory capacity or in an educational capacity. So that left a lot of people who were going into private practice or working for small group practices kind of at a disadvantage. And so, with that in mind, I ended up developing my own business, Guardian Clinical Essentials, where I am trying to close some of that gap. And in that, I've also taken the fact that I have a solo practice that I've had for 10 years, and I also am co-owner in a group practice for 5 years. So all of those things that have educated me and formed my career experience from an operational standpoint have really helped guide me in going into the more compliance space.
Yeah, wow, fascinating. So many threads to pull from right there, Samantha. I like to go back a little bit further in time. What motivated you to be a therapist in the first place?
Oh goodness, that is going way back. So when I was in college, I ended up working one summer selling educational books door to door.
Wow.
And yeah, that's a whole thing in itself. And in doing that, I ended up finding that I was talking more with the parents about their kids' struggles in school and more about what was going on for them. And I was able to pull from my own experiences in school and kind of have these conversations with parents that had nothing to do with selling the materials that I had, which may not have been great on one hand, but in doing that, I really found that talking to people about whatever they were going through and kind of guiding them and giving some possibly helpful suggestions to the parents that ended up being something that it felt very natural for me. And I ended up going back to school after the summer, and I changed my major. And I had kind of always in the back of my head, because I didn't know how that would come into play in a career. But after having a couple conversations with friends who were also in college, I'm like, oh, you know what? I kind of always thought that would be a cool job. Like even from a younger age, the perception of what doing therapy or even somebody who's like a psychologist or a psychiatrist doing that kind of work really was kind of intriguing for me, but I had never really considered it as a career.
Wow. Yeah, that is so interesting. Door-to-door sales, that's like the hardest form of selling, right? Like knocking on people's doors and
It is. It
ooh,
is.
getting rejected in person, like in the, you know what I mean? That is, yeah, that's tough. That's a,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, yeah. And so it's interesting that you went to, with the intent of like selling a product and ended up having conversations with the parents. do you, and that kind of shaped you and your like kind of career trajectory to become a therapist, just in helping people through those conversations and kind of um, uh, um, experiencing like helping in person. Like I just imagine you on those like front door porches, like right there, just like people come out and you're just talking with them. Is that kind of how it went for you, Samantha?
I mean, it did. Because, of course, part of sales, especially like door to door sales where you're at somebody's house on the porch, I did a very good job at getting in the door. But then as soon as I got in the door, the conversation opened up. We started talking about whatever the things were that the kids were going through. And everything else just kind of like all of the sales part went out the window.
Gotcha. Wow. So you're doing door-to-door sales, you have these great experiences, and then your career trajectory changes.
Right.
Then you hit the
I mean, at
world of
that time I was like 19.
got
So
it. Got it. And then you become a therapist. So what kind of therapist were you, Samantha? Or are you, did you pick social work, family therapy? What?
I am a licensed master social worker, and I have my clinical and my macro. So I have both of the classifications for that. I am in Michigan, so and I have spent my entire career here. So I did early in my career, I did a lot of work with contract agencies who worked through or for community mental health. So a lot of the really intense clients, like basically your job is to try to keep them out of the psychiatric unit, and do your best to, kind of triage that kind of part of things, and then work on building skills. And so early on, I did a lot of DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, working with really intense personality disorders, and had a lot of experience doing group work. And from there, I was also doing supervision and supervising people who were getting their license and even getting their degree at that time. So I did a lot of that kind of work for probably about the first 10 years of my career, and then got more into different levels of supervision after that. And so things have just kind of continued to evolve. And then in my own practice, and probably over the last like maybe 5 years, I've gotten a lot more into incorporating different types of alternative and complementary practices into my approach with clients. And so really focusing on holistic and integrative health and like the whole person, whole body, somatic kind of work. Which I absolutely love. I love doing energy work and am trained in a lot of the different forms of energy work. So from a therapeutic standpoint, I really incorporate a lot of that in with my individual clients on that side of what I do.
Wow. Yeah, that is so cool. And there's so many questions that I have for you as far as, the different type of training that you've completed and that you bring to your practice. Although I like to kind of stay focused on the HIPAA thing. Is that okay with you?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
what were some of you mentioned earlier that you started receiving or being asked a lot more questions.
Mhm.
I'm kind of presuming that they were HIPAA related, compliance related. What were some of those early questions that you received that you started um, kind of telling yourself like, maybe there's something here, like there's a big gap here. Do you remember what those early questions were?
Well, so a lot of that kind of stuff ended up being like somebody was going through an issue where they could have been sued. In some of the issues, they actually did get sued, and that there was possibly a HIPAA breach, or I recently ended up going back and looking at a conversation I had had with an acquaintance through social media. And this conversation happened 8 years ago. And in that conversation, it was her reaching out and saying that she had had a HIPAA breach in her private practice and was even questioning if she needed to change her career trajectory for herself, because she's like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm cut out for this kind of work. Because she had at that time sent a client record to the wrong person, not to the client it actually belonged to. And she was incredibly stressed out and was going, oh my gosh, like, what do I do? What happens now? What are the steps I need to follow? I don't know what to do. And so I was giving her some guidance on how to kind of walk through that and how to navigate that from that end. So there have been a lot of different kinds of things, even like, what do you report for child protective services from a compliance? Like, what are your obligations to report things and have it either be investigated, or when do you decide not to report something? How do you build different things to insurance companies? Can you use a sliding scale? Is that permitted? Or if you're working with insurance companies, can you not use a sliding scale? What should you put on your website? And so what are some of the things that are maybe legally not permitted to put on your website? So it really crossed the whole gamut of things out there. And with that, a lot of it was really kind of compliance based. What is going to protect you? What is going to protect your license? What is going to protect clients or whoever might be receiving your services?
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of areas that kind of HIPAA crosses into. For those of us, I should say, that really haven't worked or dealt with a whole lot of HIPAA things. How would you explain it in just simple terms? For those of us that haven't really dealt with it.
So I would say that HIPAA is really focused on protecting the confidentiality and privacy of your clients. And really at its core, that is what it's trying to do. So when HIPAA comes in from the regulating standpoint of what HIPAA is doing, is that it's going to make sure that you as a provider are following your duty, legally speaking, to protect that security and privacy. So that might be their identity. It might be the things that they disclose in session as part of their treatment. And it might also be keeping their things secure on either your computer system, it might be hard copy, it might be digital, or it could be through an electronic medical record.
Got it. Yeah, that's sounds like there's a lot there. Yeah, and it's funny because when you were saying that, I remember being in school and like hearing HIPAA. And HIPAA was always like this, almost like this like boogeyman, kind of like the IRS, like there's this thing out there that's going to crack the whip if you don't do the right things at the right time. What are some of the myths or misunderstandings that you've experienced, Samantha, in your experience working with clients that tend to have about HIPAA? Like,
Well, so what I come across a lot is that HIPAA is a release of information. That's really what does get addressed in school is whatever a client tells you, don't tell anybody else.
mhm.
So release of information is required to converse about that client's information with anybody. So people tend to understand that, and they tend to understand the notice of privacy practices. So if you get beyond that, people kind of believe that that's all there is, because that's what they're exposed to. So that would be probably the number one myth, is that it's much deeper than the initial perception and whatever we're taught about. So that's one of the things. And another thing would be that having an EHR protects you and basically covers whatever kind of compliance requirements that there is. And that is absolutely not true. So, and there are a lot of pieces to that and why that isn't true, but it is it is really so much more. What I end up saying is that EHR is one spoke of the wheel, and there's so much more outside of that. So when you go beyond an EHR, and I don't know if you want to dive into that a little bit right now or not, but an EHR is going to cover what happens inside of it. And there's so much to your business you're communicating with clients, you're maybe writing letters, and all the other pieces that are outside of your EHR. So anything you do inside of there is usually okay, as long as you have it all set up correctly. You're using like the integrated messaging system, or you're using their billing system. So if you get out of your EHR and you're doing anything that has to do with clients, that's where all those other spokes come in. So if you write a letter on behalf of a client, now you're probably using something like Word or Google Doc or something, some kind of word processing system. And now you have client information in there. You might have their name, their address, their birthday, their diagnosis. Now you have all this PHI going on. And that means that's now at risk for not being compliant, and you would need to have BAAs in place, business associate agreements, that are protecting that privacy, even for that information, to make sure that it is secure and that your client information isn't at risk. So there are a lot of moving pieces beyond the compliance of what an EHR would cover. Another myth would be that using even templates for things like your policies or your notices or consent forms, using the usually a lot of people are using their EHRs and will end up using the templates that the EHR provides. Well, because it's easy and the work is done for you, and why would you not? Like, that's a huge benefit to using an EHR. Well, in those EHR templates that they often provide, a lot of them will have a little mention of, hey, you need to customize this and personalize this to make sure that it is fully going to protect your agency or your solo practice. And a lot of people aren't doing that. They think maybe customizing it is throwing their agency name on it and a logo, maybe contact information, and that's about it. But there's so many other things that go into that are required. Like there are a lot of federal things that aren't addressed in those template documents. There are a lot of state requirements because every state has its own rules when it comes to HIPAA, which a lot of people aren't aware of that. Even people who've been in practice for years aren't always aware of that, which I totally get, because there's a lot of lack of understanding and lack of information and a lot of misinformation because of the limited things that we are educated about. So it comes down to really customizing those templates and making sure that your practice is protected.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought up this the federal regulations, statutes, whatever, the state regulations as well, because it sounds to me like there's like this web of regulations that we're kind of dealing with and navigating through to make sure that we're protected. And thank you for sharing some of those myths. I wonder, what are some of the common issues that you see in the work you do?
Oh, common issues? Well, geez, that is pretty broad. But I will say some of the things that I come across that are often coming up is people have their business marketed online, usually on a website. And most often, I would say that the websites are not compliant from the standpoint of using things like the contact forms. The contact forms that now have all of your client information in there are not protecting the client confidentiality. You have your contact forms on a website, and unfortunately, the contact forms are usually not protected. So clients are putting information on the contact form, and good grief, don't get me started on what they can put in that little text box that people give them, because people will put so much personal information in there. They will say, I'm going through a divorce and this is happening and this is happening, and or I'm involved with the legal system, and here's all of my insurance information, and here's everything about my life in like a paragraph form. And that is really, really risky for the client and for the practice, because usually those contact forms are not protected in any kind of way. And really, according to HIPAA, even having like a little italic thing saying, hey, this is not protected might not really be enough to cover you as a practice, because just giving a client a disclaimer in that one spot isn't probably doing enough to protect them or to help them to understand that they're putting their information out there, and it could end up really anywhere with how the internet works and how digital information can be obtained. So the contact forms are huge. Having people even use things like chat bots on their sites, I see that kind of stuff a lot. I see a lot of people do things like putting testimonials on their websites, even though we're told that we're not supposed to use testimonials. One of the more recent things that I have seen is that they are integrating Google and Google reviews. And so it'll actually pop in like embedded Google review that the person has left for the practice. And it will even have all of their Google information on there, meaning that it'll have a little circle of their face in their real photo. It'll have their full name or whatever their Google handle is. And those things are really exposing the practice to high level violations. And because violation like that can be considered a fourth tier violation, which is almost 70 grand per violation. So it can be a pretty costly thing if somebody gets caught doing that.
Yeah, and I also have seen that just kind of perusing through therapist websites, some of these really cool review functions where like it pops up and it's like a nice picture of the client and like the little quote of the review, and it looks nice, but it sounds like that may probably not be best practice according to HIPAA. And then also, yeah, I've also seen the chatbots, and the contact us forms. Samantha, one thing that, as you were saying, that stood out for me was a lot of these website hosts, like, I'm not going to name them, but, any website producer, host company out there, these big companies, they talk about how their websites are secure, like they have like these security certificates and this and that. It's just like, for the person who's not really tech savvy, they're just trying to get their private practice up and running. And they're like, okay, I mean, it's secure. It's a big company. It's trusted, I guess. Right. And they go in there and they set up their website, or they buy a template. So are you saying that those contact us forms are not at risk, even though they say that their websites are, that have security?
So when it comes down to somebody potentially building their own website, or even going through a company that designs it, like a web design company, unless you're paying for something like secure hosting, which is a very expensive thing to pay for, to the tune of maybe like $200 to $400 a month for secure hosting, which a lot of practices would have a hard time affording. So a lot of people aren't going to pay for secure hosting. If you're not paying for secure hosting and you're putting any of that information actually on your website, or allowing clients to put that information on your website, that isn't protected. So I'm not sure what companies that you've seen that say that they have secure information or that things are compliant on some level. But even the companies that I have used to design my own websites with, I know that they're not automatically secure, and there would be things you would have to put in place to make them secure. Very specifically would have to make and put them in place. So you would have to get either plugins that have a security level on them, so that that information isn't actually going through to the hosting company. Because what happens is, so let's say John Smith comes along and he is going to sign up for, or try to sign up for therapy services through your website. And he puts all of his information in your contact box and sends it off. And now he's waiting for you to email him or contact him in some kind of way. When all of that information goes out there, the hosting company that is sometimes not at all connected with where you have purchased your website through. And sometimes it also isn't connected with where you are, like you're getting your design through, if you have a design. So, or a design company. So sometimes you can have 3 different companies involved there on different layers of building this website. And when that happens, the hosting company can then take that information and they can sell that to a third party, because there's no reason that they can't. So when you think about how it works when you're using a device and you go to search something, even whether you're using Google or Bing or Yahoo or any of those kinds of search engines, if you go to search for new tennis shoes, now you're going to end up seeing ads for new tennis shoes. That's how that kind of stuff happens. There's trackers and different kinds of cookies and different things that will track what you're doing. And now somebody who came to your website is getting ads for, it could be self-help books. It could be some of the large companies that provide therapy and are nationwide kind of therapy companies. And some of those things are now coming in to their devices and they're getting those kinds of ads because of what they've put on your website.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, yeah, I've seen some website design companies that say, that they offer this ability to have like an online store, and then you can have clients visit your site, buy the products or services. And I think that when I've seen a description of those services from the website to the potential store owners, they'll say things like, "Hey, we protect your client's information, the payment processing, all of these things are secure." But I don't know if that's the same as somebody tapping in their information on the contact forms. You know what I
Not
mean?
usually. I mean, I can't say that across the board because, of course, there's a lot of different things that you can integrate into your system, and there's a lot of plugins and different tools that you can use. But I would not automatically make that assumption.
Yeah. So it sounds like a clinician could benefit by or from asking those questions, like, hey, like, to the company. It's like if they're looking in the market for a website design and they're going in and shopping around, to ask these specific questions to those companies, like, is the information that my clients input into this contact form secure in some way, and if so, how? Is that
Mhm.
probably a good practice?
Yeah, absolutely. And
Mhm.
usually, actually, what I do recommend that people do is don't use a box that is an
Mhm.
open message box in your contact form. You
Mhm.
would actually be allowed to collect the person's name and just their contact info. So, whether that's email address is better than even collecting their phone number, but you can also get their phone number, and you would want to have them sign consent that really is very a robust
Mhm.
consent form. You want a robust consent form for like a little required checkbox before they put that information in, and don't give them an open text box. They don't need to tell you all of that and put it through your website to give you that information. If you want to securely be emailing later or
Mhm.
talk to them on the phone about that after you've gotten their information, please do it that way. That is much more compliant, and they don't need to tell you their life story and who knows what they might put in there. And so even people saying, don't put personal health information in this text box, do most clients even know what that means? um, the other thing a lot of clients will end up doing is they will maybe even share their insurance numbers. They will put different names of other family members in there. So, like, things can really escalate in those text boxes, and you don't want that. So the thing that I do suggest that they do, which is a really clean way to do this, is use what your EHR provides. Use your integrated system, because they usually have some way that you can embed scheduling system, even a messaging system that the client then, or prospective client at that point, either way, would end up clicking something and navigating completely off of your website and into your EHR to message you or to schedule. And by doing it like that, you're kind of like, let's pass the security buck. And let's have your EHR, what you're already paying for. So let's have your EHR take that security risk, because they're going to be much more protected under that EHR's information and through their website than through anything that they're going to put into your website.
Wow. Yeah, that's definitely one thing I didn't know, was that we had the opportunity or the function to be able to embed the EHR's like information gathering resource into our website. That's really interesting. I didn't know that. And I want to go back to something you said earlier, Samantha, about how there are many spokes to this wheel. And it sounds like we just kind of barely touched on one of the spokes, which is the contact us form. Do you mind sharing maybe one more common spoke that you encounter in your work, just to kind of we get a full understanding of, not full understanding, but like a better understanding of like this HIPAA world of compliance?
So I would say that the EHR is one of the spokes. Your website and having your website be compliant, it would be another. So I'd put the whole website on there, not even just the contact form, because there are a lot of things, as I have said to other people, the website is really such a high risk for people with compliance. It's a minefield for compliance issues. So there, that would be one of the spokes. Another one would be BAAs. People don't have the business associate agreements that are required, and you really have to have a BAA set up and signed. And even though you have a system that could provide it or is capable of providing it, if you have an EHR and you're like, oh yeah, my EHR obviously has BAAs, if you don't have one retained for your records, if you didn't download it, if you don't have it as part of either a digital HIPAA manual for your practice or in hard copy, either one, it doesn't matter. If you don't have that in your possession, then you don't actually have a BAA with them. So you want a BAA with every person who is touching anything to do with your client's records or could potentially see any of your client's records.
Wow. Yeah, that is interesting. Not having the BAA downloaded somewhere, accessible, even printed in a way, puts us at risk. Is that sound right? Wow.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Samantha, earlier you mentioned something about tiers. I think you mentioned like a 4-tier
Oh yeah.
violation for the example. What are the different tiers, and what are the different fines / punitive actions that these regulatory bodies can take?
So there are 4 different tiers, and they're set up to go from the least severe to the most severe. And the least severe, and they have like their terminology for it, but I'm gonna kind of break it down in very human terms. And so the first tier is if somebody, a clinician, a provider, breaks confidentiality or is non-compliant in some kind of way and they don't realize it. And as soon as they do realize it, even though there has been a violation, they move to fixing it and follow all the rules. That would be the first tier. So these are obviously things that, like, when there's a violation, this is where the tiers come in. It is, if you're not doing anything that where you're breaking confidentiality, or if you're not if there's no non-compliance, then the tiers wouldn't be an issue. But these are really, when it comes to a HIPAA violation, how they designate the severity and then therefore the fines that, or consequences, because it's not always financially based, that can go with it. So with that first tier, it could be anything from a corrective action to even training or being monitored by the Office of Civil Rights until things are, a certain time frame. It might be being monitored for a year or for 2 years. It does depend on to what degree all of whatever happened. But even if you're determined to be at that first tier, some of those fines start out maybe even around $100, and then they can go up from there. Again, based on severity and how many clients essentially were affected. So tier 2 then goes into if the covered entity, which that would be the provider, that they should have been aware but could not have done anything to avoid it. So this might be something like your system was hacked or something like that. Like you couldn't, maybe you did everything right, but your system was hacked, so you can't always control what the other people in the world are doing. So that would be something like a tier 2. So it's not intentional. It's not something that you were, completely negligent of, but it could not have been avoided. Now, tier 3 goes into willful neglect. So that means that there have, in that type of case, that there has been attempts made to correct the violation. So it's intentional, and you're doing it, and you're not supposed to be doing it. So that would be like tier 3. So we're getting more serious. And tier 4 would be, it would be willful neglect without any attempt to correct it. So, and for even 30 days after you figure out that there is a violation. So, with that, things can even escalate into a 4th tier, even if it was unintentional to begin with. If you're like, yeah, but I'm not going to do anything about it. Like, nothing's going to come from this. And so if you figure out that there is something that's a violation and you don't correct it, things can escalate into that. And this does come down to, like, very specifically if clients are harmed. So if there is client harm or even personal gain that the provider gets from some kind of willful neglect or some kind of violation, then that's going to be the most severe tier there.
Wow. Yeah. That 4 different tiers. And it sounds like the more severe the breach, the more damages that are caused, the more severe the fine. Is that kind of like a layman's summary of all that? Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
And those like more severe fines per person can be to the tune of about 70 grand, like the per individual or per violation. So if there were multiple clients who were involved, you can have that multiply per person or per of those violations, with the max per year being, I want to say it's between 1 to 2 million.
Wow. In total for all damages?
For that year.
Oh, for that year. Oh, wow.
So that being the max for 1 year's worth of violations. So that's really like the system of figuring out how severe it is, and that's the financial piece. But there are other things that can come from there being violations, including things like being listed on the Wall of Shame, which is a website that I know it's actually a really funny name, I think. The Wall of Shame. I mean, it's awful. Don't get me wrong. This is not a list anybody wants to be on. This is one of those examples of not all publicity is good publicity. So if there is a violation, the company would be listed on this website that the Office of Civil Rights and HHS is in charge of. And it would have where the company was located, the actual name of the company, the severity, and how many clients were even affected by whatever happened. So if there is a breach and that affects like the entire caseload of a big multi-location office or something like that, like there could be thousands of clients that could be affected. And those numbers can get big in those kinds of situations for number of violations, and sometimes even what the fines are. Not everything it ends up being listed, because some things are negotiated, or are they come up with an agreement where people, I'm not saying that people don't end up on the wall of shame, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is going to end up with a gigantic fine. Sometimes even being monitored on an ongoing basis by the Office of Civil Rights, and having staff required trainings that you have to be reporting, and all of the man hours that go into reporting those kinds of things can be rather extensive as well.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, I can only imagine what it's like for a group practice or a business owner who's like, yeah, even though they didn't get a fine necessarily, a monetary fine, like now they have to do 10 or 20 hours of training or whatever like those are 10 hours per clinician or for all your staff. That's expensive, right? You got to pay them to do all these things. And not only are you paying them potentially to do this training, but you're also missing out on clinical hours where you're actually like earning money for your practice. So yeah, I could imagine how either way, whether it's monetary or non-monetary, these things could be pretty expensive.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You got
Samantha,
it.
you mentioned something really interesting earlier. You said the Office of Civil Rights. So are they? And so you mentioned Office of Civil Rights and HHS. What does HHS mean?
It's basically the human health, like where I live, it's called DHHS, the Department of Health and Human Services. But sometimes with all the different like acronyms, because there's a lot of acronyms out there that overlap. So the Health and Human Services is the main core of that. So those would be the same offices that people would go to if they're filing for Medicaid, or that's where the Child Protective Services, Adult Protective Services, all of that is out of HHS.
Got it. And yeah, it's surprising that the Office of Civil Rights kind of handles this. When I hear the word or the phrase Office of Civil Rights, I'm like thinking they're like doing something totally different than HIPAA and compliance things. Yeah, that's interesting. So do they work together, or is it like one kind of take precedent over the
The
other?
Office of Civil Rights is a department within HHS.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Samantha, what is the biggest fine that you've seen in your work so far?
I would say that this was not somebody I was working with, but there was a report that I read that was, I mean, because the fines can really only go up to that max. So it was about like a $2 million fine.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah. Was that a group practice?
yeah, it was a larger. I wouldn't even say it was a group practice. I think that was even like a hospital system.
Oh, got it. And so they had some kind of situation and they got fined $2 million, which sounds
Yeah,
like the max.
one of the more recent things that happened, like this was just like a few months ago. I want to say that there was an issue where a hospital did not have their information set up correctly on the website, and you could get in and see client records for like the average, just somebody looking online could get in and see client records on there. So that would be a pretty big problem.
Yeah, it sounds like it would be a pretty big problem. Geez. Yeah, that's wild. Samantha, so if a therapist who's new to private practice or even already in private practice, and they haven't done any formal kind of training or even kind of dipped their toe in the water as far as HIPAA, where's a good place for them to start?
For self-training, I would say like you can get a lot of information and resources from the website, the HHS website. So that is a great place to start, and that's much more informational. You're not going to get like certificates or CEUs from looking on their website, so that's a great place for self-education. Another option would be that there are some websites out there that do put out certificate-based training on HIPAA. Unfortunately, a lot of it is not actually mental health specific, and which is difficult for our field because a lot of it does follow the medical model, which is very difficult to transition to mental health for the practitioners that I speak with. And I mean, it's kind of like trying to wear your older brother's clothes that's 4 sizes too big, and nothing you're going to do is going to make that fit and make it work right. So it just doesn't really work out well. And that's part of the gap that I saw. And that's why I started going down this path, because there just isn't a lot of information that's practical and useful for the mental health aspect of HIPAA.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I'm hearing for the clinician out there who's like, man, maybe I kind of should look into this whole HIPAA compliance world and learn more about those spokes in the wheel, like we talked about. HHS sounds like a pretty good resource. And it sounds like there are companies out there that do provide some support, but may not be necessarily therapy world specific. Like it's more like medical model, medical thing, like hospitals, doctors' offices. I'm imagining, right, like that world. Are there any specific companies that kind of deal with mental health, the mental health world?
Actually, none of them that I even know of really target mental health, and that's why my business is doing that because they're like, this is a huge gap, and it's hard for our therapists to understand. I totally get it, because it's converting a lot of information that isn't really user friendly or doesn't really make sense into something that is practical and does make sense. So there are a lot of resources on my website that people are certainly welcome to peruse through there. I have lots of frequently asked question areas. I have a whole page dedicated to frequently asked questions. And I'm even going toward the direction of doing more education. And I have a couple of CEU trainings planned for this year where people can get credits as well, like get your CEUs for getting mental health HIPAA trained. So that is something that I'm trying to do because this was never my intention. It was never my intention to go into HIPAA compliance or anything like that. But when people kept coming to me for these kinds of things, and the more I got into it, the bigger gap I saw. So I guess that this is the path I'm on.
Yeah. Wow. That's really cool. And the fact that you are putting together training that can allow clinicians to gain CEUs, I mean, that's amazing, right? Like I feel like anybody that goes through that whole process has to be ready to deliver value and something meaningful, because you don't get accredited and do the investment and put the whole resource package together for it to not be valuable to the people that are signing up for it. So that's really cool. Samantha, so is HIPAA, the world of HIPAA and compliance, is that like a one-time thing, or is that like an ongoing process? How does that work?
So it's actually both. so we're and I'm going to tell you exactly what I mean. So first off, a lot of the things that need to be done from a HIPAA direction to protect your practice, and the things that are required by HIPAA are things that you would end up doing once. So if we're talking about setting up your email so that it is HIPAA compliant and it is encrypted email, once you configure your systems in your email, you don't have to go back and do that all the time. So some of those things are like, once it's done, it's done. However, you would really want to be monitoring all of those things in your SRA. So that is a security risk assessment or security risk analysis. So the security risk analysis actually helps you to monitor those things to make sure everything is still up to date, and that none of your BAAs have expired, that everything is still maintaining its level of security and compliance. So you would want to go back, maybe even on an annual basis, or if something changed within your practice, that's how often you're required to do the SRAs, because that is part of the legal requirements for HIPAA, is doing, every practice has to have an SRA on their agency, and they have to show that they have been going over it at least annually and have that documented. And also anytime that there is a change, I see those eyeballs, Rich, like you're like, whoa. So anytime that there's a change in your practice, so that could mean that you switch your email provider, or you switch to a different EHR, or that you added in some kind of new, whether it's like a secure platform, or whether it's some other kind of tool that you brought in, or even if you hire a new person, you're supposed to be going through those SRAs and making sure that everything is compliant, and that you're just kind of checking off everything and saying like, yep, we're good here, we're good here. Because even though you might set up your email and go through the process of configuring it all to be encrypted, there are updates that can happen. I mean, we all know we get like these updates coming to our devices all the time, like, oh, this needs an update, or this downloaded something new, right? And so as that happens, some of those updates can set it back to the default. And if you're not monitoring it, you might not notice. So you want to at least annually be going into your systems and making sure that those things are still up to date.
Now, if a practice is not doing the SRAs, by the way, I did not know about SRAs, so that's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. So if practice is not doing the SRA updates or reviews or assessments or analysis every year, like they're supposed to, it sounds like, and then there's a breach. And then the Office of Civil Rights, I'm looking at my notes, Office of Civil Rights or HHS comes down, or whatever HHS for their state or locality comes down. Will they look at that? Will they say, hey, let's see your SRA. Like, what did you do to prevent this from happening? Show us what you've been doing. And it reminds me of kind of like consultation. Like when the client reports a clinician to the board, typically like they'll look at that, like, hey, are you seeing peer consultation? Are you getting supervision? Like, what are you doing to make sure that your practice, your clinical practice, is as good as it could be to service this client? Then they take that into consideration when they're analyzing the whole situation. Is that kind of the same, Samantha? Like, are they looking at?
Absolutely. Yeah, you totally got it. So if there is some kind of an issue that the Office of Civil Rights has to investigate, and it could be something that you've self-reported, because we are required to self-report within 60 days maximum if we find out that there was some kind of breach or some kind of concern that there was a violation. So and they want you to do it even sooner than that. Like they want you to only take the required time necessary to deal with whatever the issue was, notify the whatever clients involved, and then notify them right away. They don't want you waiting. I mean, you're almost red flagging yourself if you wait till day like 59 to do that. So with that, yes, they will come in. One of their first questions is going to be, we want to see your HIPAA manual. So we want to see all of your policies and procedures for your agency that are at a federal level and state level for whatever states you serve. So there are so many people getting credentialed and licensed in other states, especially with the compacts that are coming out and all of that. So now you're licensed in 42 states. Do you have all of that in writing? So that puts a whole lot of burden on the provider as you get licensed in more states, because you need all of that in your policies and procedures. And then you need to hand all of that over, and they're going to ask for your security risk assessment, and you got to hand all of that over. And then they're going to start going through all of that and determining what actually happened with the violation or potential violation, if a violation did actually occur. And as they do that, that might also be them interviewing you, other members of your staff, or even whoever made the report if it was made by somebody else.
Yeah, dang, that's wild. And it makes a lot of sense, to be honest, now that you've kind of educated me on very, very, these like basics, right? It makes sense that the department would come in and ask for those documents, so that they're like, I mean, just to get an assessment of the situation. Like, what is this practice doing, right? Like, just like we
Yeah.
do assessments, they're going to do their own, and that includes looking at the policies. Speaking of policies and other documents like that, Samantha, what are some important documents that every therapist should have to be audit ready?
Specifically to be audit ready, those are the ones you need your policies and procedures for anything that would go in your HIPAA manual. You need those. You need your security risk analysis to be audit ready, and you want your BAAs.
Yeah.
And if you have all those locked down, you're sitting pretty good.
Yeah, that's really cool. So how can HIPAA compliance or lack of compliance, can that impact like malpractice insurance or licensing? How does that work?
It actually can. My own malpractice insurance, and my professional liability insurance has a clause right in it that says that if I am not following all the regulations of my own license and following the law to uphold the things that I am practicing, that they could deny whatever claim that I make, or if there was something that I needed to use that policy for, that I would have to prove I was doing some of those things beforehand. So with that in mind, if there was something like a breach that happened and I wasn't doing the things I was supposed to do, that they could deny the claim.
What? So
Yeah.
they can say, I mean, it makes sense, right? They're kind of like an insurance company, and the insurance company is going to go in and say, hey, well, were you doing the maintenance that you were supposed to? Like, and if you weren't,
Absolutely.
then we're not going to cover it, right? Like all insurance companies are going to look for whatever thing to not have to pay. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. And so even if it wasn't a breach, if it was something like you lost your laptop and you needed to either file a claim, or because of something that was on your laptop that you had to report it, and your license and your license insurance, your liability insurance got involved in that. If that was something that happened, they would be asking you, okay, well, was your laptop encrypted? Most people think having a password on their laptop, so when you're opening up your password, your laptop initially, that it'll ask you for your password, and most people have like a 4-digit number or one word, their pet's name and their birthday, right? For their password. However, if your files on your laptop were not encrypted, it isn't locked down to the level that HIPAA requires, and that is a risk right there. It's a violation.
Wow. Yeah, that's so wild that that our malpractice insurance can come back and deny whatever claims that we make just because we weren't following the rule of the law. And I mean, that's, we're told like, hey, make sure you're doing all the right things. What if somebody's like, I didn't know, sorry, I just wasn't aware of this. Like, it's kind of like one of those things that I don't really get taught, right? Like I just started right away. Like, is there wiggle room with that, or are they pretty
No, unfortunately, there really isn't, because we are all considered educated professionals, and it is part of our professional and ethical duty to do these things. And the burden of not knowing is on us. So if we didn't know, we're still completely as liable as if we knew and didn't do it. And so either way, that is on us.
Yeah. Wow. So, what does an audit look like, Samantha? Let's say somebody's listening to this episode and they're like, "Wow, you know what? Might be a good idea to reach out and do like an assessment or an initial audit." What does that initial audit look like? Is that like a multi-hour, multi-day thing? Is it like a quick thing? How does that go?
So when you say what does it look like, you mean like the SRA? Like what would doing an SRA look like for on yourself, or what would it look like if you're being audited by like the Office of Civil Rights?
Yeah, let me ask that again. So, if somebody wants to reach out to a company like yours to do like an initial consultation, an initial audit, what would that look like?
Okay, so what I would do is I would go through a whole list of things to find out where their gaps are. where they're exposed potentially, how protected and what things that they are doing intentionally to protect their system, whether it's what are they doing to protect their practice or what are they doing to protect the clients on both ends. So I would be looking at all of those kinds of questions. And with that is, how many BAAs do you have? What companies are you actually working with? And do you have BAAs for all of them? Are you using it in the EHR? Because not 100% of people do. Like there's still some OGs that are using paper, but the people who are using EHRs, what do you have set up in your system? Do you have people scheduling right from the system? Are people leaving voicemails on your personal cell phone? Are people using HIPAA compliant email systems? So I'm going to be talking through all of those kinds of things to figure out all those different spokes on the wheel and see if all of those things are like tight and in order.
Yeah. Now, if somebody maybe is not quite ready to do a full consultation / assessment with a professional like you, is there maybe a resource that they can kind of like a checklist of sorts that they can kind of print and go through it on their own and kind of try to DIY it as best they can?
There is actually, yeah. So I do have on my website a checklist that is exactly what you're describing. It goes over the 15 categories that I know, right? That you would want to address to make sure that you are being compliant. And so the checklist can be found on my website, guardianclinicalessentials.com, and you can easily navigate that and find the free checklist and fill out that for yourself, which will help you then to identify what gaps are still out there that you would want to make sure you're getting locked down for your own practice. So that'll help you figure out like what you do have covered, and then you can even prioritize those other pieces that may have been missed.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I made those eyes because 15 sounds like a lot, but to me, it's like that. It sounds thorough, right? Like it's not like, oh, here are the 3 things you should look at. It's like 15. It sounds like a lot, but to me, it's like it's thorough. It's like, yeah, we're going through and we're really making sure that your practice
Mhm.
is ironclad and we're assessing
Right.
for risk, and that's really cool. Um,
Right, because HIPAA is way more than just your notice of privacy practices
mm,
and a release of information.
yeah. Absolutely. For clinicians who are kind of overwhelmed, right? Like they got a lot going on. Um, Life things, work things, private practice, clients, things like that, their own CEUs, their own stuff going on, just overwhelmed. And then they see this episode and they're like, now I got one more thing to add to the list of to do. What's kind of the first mindset shift that you would recommend to them?
So what I definitely would want to express is that you're already probably doing a lot of the things that need to be done. The big thing with HIPAA is, do you have the paper trail to prove it? Do you have it written down? Do you have it logged somewhere? Do you have documentation that proves that you're doing it? Because most people are doing the things that are really basic and the things that they have been educated on, things like getting a release of information. So you're getting the releases of information, and you are doing usually the documentation in the client record to say, hey, I got this release for this person. I sent these records off to the person that needed them, and you're putting that in the client chart. So that's documented. But what HIPAA wants is an additional log that says that these were all of the things that were released, and these are all of the information that demonstrates that we did what we were supposed to do with releasing that information.
Mm,
So because they're not going to pull separate client records randomly to see if you've done what you were supposed to do on releasing information for that client, if there was ever even a release for that client. Like that's not going to prove anything. So you need to actually have those things documented specifically for your HIPAA compliance. So you're doing a lot of the things already. It's just writing down the extra things that you're doing for those purposes. And then also making sure that you have a system in place. It helps a lot to have a system in place where you can, on a monthly basis, be going through. So let's say that you go and you fill out that checklist and you identify some things for your own practice that need to be put into place. And as you do that, you would then want to maybe on a monthly basis schedule in time to say like, okay, I'm going to now start hammering out some of these things that we didn't have in place and just working on it a little by little. Because when it comes to the Office of Civil Rights, what they want to see is that you are making progress. It isn't really about perfection. It's progress over perfection. They don't expect anybody to be perfect, but if you are making that effort and you can show that you're making that effort and that you're working in the best interest of your clients to do that, that's what they want to see.
Yeah, that's really cool. And in many ways, Samantha, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds to me as I'm kind of listening to you, it sounds like HIPAA compliance and HIPAA reviews can almost be considered like a foundational piece of an ethical practice. It's not just like a legal thing, like, oh, I got to get that done. Like it in many ways, it really is kind of a foundation of a solid ethical practice. What are your thoughts on that?
That I think is a great point. A big part of what HIPAA is protecting your clients. And that's what we're really all about too, right? Like that's a huge core in doing the kind of work that we do in mental health is to protect our clients. And so if we do have that in at the foundation, like it's the foundation of the house, right? That you want to have all of those pieces put into place and you really can build everything from there. You're building your entire practice based on what those policies and procedures say you're going to do and how you're going to run your business.
Yeah, really cool. Samantha, if people wanted to reach out and kind of partner up with you to work together, make sure that they are HIPAA ready, HIPAA compliant, how can they reach you?
You can absolutely reach me through my website, www.guardianclinicalessentials.com, and you can reach me through there, and you can reach all of my you can reach all of my checklists and free resources. I have a lot of information on that website.
Super cool. Samantha, this has been really, really good. I appreciate your time. And maybe we could do it again in the future.
Absolutely. I love talking HIPAA.
Heck yeah. All right, everybody, signing out.